One of my life lessons is that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they say yes to God's call. I'm Marcy Erickson. I was born and raised in Naples, Florida. As a senior in high school, I asked God what He wanted me to do with my life. I heard God say, "I want you to be a missionary." At 18, I became a missionary full-time, first serving in Guatemala, and then at 19, God brought me to Ethiopia, where I served for a year teaching in a school and in other capacities as well. During my first year in Ethiopia, there were many things that shocked me. It was in the middle of a 5-year famine, and hundreds of people would come every day with starving babies and children. Many times there would be babies left outside the doors as we locked up the school at night. There was no orphanage in this particular mission, but all the orphanages in Ethiopia were full. These orphanages had rules that the infants shouldn't be held so that they wouldn't get used to being held, and then they wouldn't cry for attention. In turn, they never received the love and affection they needed. Even though the mission where I was did not have an orphanage, they would still take in abandoned children. After my first year in Ethiopia, I knew God wanted me to spend my life as a missionary. I felt God was calling me to adopt and foster care for as many children as I could personally take on. I went to many countries in Africa by bus. God leading the way, I was happy to serve in any capacity. But it was only in returning to Ethiopia after a 5-year absence that God clearly opened the doors for me to follow His call in Ethiopia. I began by receiving 3 children, Tariku when he was 2 years and 9 months old. 3 weeks later, I received James when he was 13 days old, and 3 weeks after that, I received Amanu when he was 3 months old. As a new single mom of 3, I was a bit overwhelmed when more people continued to come to me with more children. In fact, it was only a few days after I returned from the capital city, Addis Ababa, to our home in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, after completing the Ethiopian side of the adoptions of my 3 boys, when I was asked to take in another child. When I expressed that I couldn't take in another child, I felt devastation for this child. There was no place for this child to go. It was a few days later that God placed a vision in my head of how a center could be properly run, having 1 caregiver for every 2 infants, providing proper love and nourishment. At this pivotal moment in my life, I asked God for a confirmation. If this is coming from you, Lord, you will give me the people to help me run this center. I called to missionary friends who were serving in the capital city. I told them I had this crazy idea, but I didn't mention my prayer. In the middle of my first sentence, they said they would move up to Bahir Dar and help start the program. God had answered the prayer in less than 5 minutes. We began by taking in 5 foster children. Within months, we were serving hundreds of women and children. It was a few years into running Grace Center that we realized we had the only program in all of Ethiopia that does what we do. A year after I adopted my 3 boys, I received my daughter when she was just 5, and a year later, my husband and I were married. We have since added 8 more children to our family. We have 12 beautiful children now, and my oldest daughter, who's 21, is now married and has a child of her own. In a country with a population of over 110 million people, we continue to be the only ones that help all people who come to us in need and see each person as an individual and try to help each person reach the goals that God has in mind for him or her. We started the first infant daycare program in all of Ethiopia, a free program that offers one of the only alternatives to a single mom who many times feels like her only option for survival for her and her child is to completely abandon her child. We also started the first emergency phone number in all of Ethiopia. It's a number a woman can call or text when she feels she has no hope and her only option is to abandon her child. We were able to find solutions for her to be able to keep her child. We also help with medical care, school sponsorship, tutoring, foster care, adoptions of orphans with families in Ethiopia. We actually started the nationwide adoption program within Ethiopia so Ethiopian families could adopt. We wrote all the protocol for these adoptions, including walking alongside these families, following up even years after the adoption. We have a school, including a school and daycare for children with all levels of disabilities. Again, the only program in Ethiopia like this. Several years into running Grace Center, we learned about children in prison. In Ethiopia, when a mother goes to prison, her children go to prison with her. We never knew about these children, but once we knew about them, we were able to begin supporting these children, sending them to school. Grace Center serves all of the children growing up in prison that we are aware of in Ethiopia. When we first entered the prisons, we asked each child what they wanted to be when they grew up. One child in particular responded, "I don't understand the question." This child, Tuacho, had been born in prison and was about 8 years old at this point. No one had ever asked him what he wanted to be. He never even imagined that he would leave the prison gates. Through education and outreach, this boy was able to see that God has a vision and a call for his life. In Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, the water is shut off 90% of the time. One of the other things we do is we provide water for those who have no access to water. One of the greatest parts about serving in Ethiopia for so many years was seeing miracle after miracle. I have been blessed to spend extensive time praying with many people. So what started in 2006 with 5 foster children has now grown to serve over 50,000 individuals annually. And we can only do this through generous partners and support. Thank you for your partnership with Grace Center Foundation.